please.
Anne-Marie Dulege.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, thank you. Larry Goldstein,
Here.
Steve Julesgaard,
Here.
David Martin,
Here.
Shlomo Melmed,
Here.
Joe Panetta, Barry Selleck,
Here.
Michael Stamos, Jonathan Thomas,
Here.
Art Torres,
Here.
Carol Watson. We have a quorum.
Thank you. So we have several things to accomplish at this subcommittee meeting. Meeting is being live streamed. Okay, good. So it's been quite some time since this committee met. I think the last time was when we, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but we were altering our intellectual property regulations regarding income stream to CIRM or to the state based on commercial success with regard to products. We basically updated our IP regulations to change the way that we were going to derive value for the state. I don't think we've had a meeting since then.
That is correct. The last meeting was in September of 2017 to approve the final draft of the CIRM IP regs.
Perfect, thank you. So I think the place that to start, because things have progressed since this committee was first established, some number of years ago, and is to take a look at our mission statement and essentially update the mission statement. So what I've asked Kevin to do is to start with the current mission statement, which has been in place now for, I don't know, at least a dozen or more years. And then we'd like to propose some changes to that based upon life as it occurs today. So Kevin, do you want to first put up the old mission statement? Do you have that available?
Sure. Doug, can you share that, please? And it's all going to be on one document, so we're going to scroll a little bit through it. So first, we're going to take a look at what the current mission statement is, and we're going to move on to the track changes version, so you can see some of the edits that we've been working on for the last several months. And then finally, a clean draft. Please note this is open for conversation. This is by no means final unless you're prepared to vote on it for a final copy. But in conversations with Barry and Steve, who are our co-chairs of this committee, the idea was to have a robust discussion around this, particularly the area moving to a focus on the industry aspect of the subcommittee and what that means. So you can see that before, what's before you on the top part of the screen is the current mission statement of the organization. As Steve mentioned, it's been in place for quite some time. And it accurately reflected at the time sort of the direction that the subcommittee wished to move into. Since that time and since the passage of Proposition 14, there's been some changes with respect to the focus of the organization. As those members who have been listening to the strategic plan discussion, there's been some increased emphasis in the development of the new strategic plan on how to engage industry more actively, how to work towards more commercialization and ensuring our grantees have commercialization and partners, and how do we incentivize the involvement of industry in actively in the mission of the organization. So Steve, since I can ask you, since you are a primary architect of some of the revisions here, to kind of walk us through a little bit of your thoughts as we look at the revisions on the bottom part of this page.
Sure.
Kevin, can you increase the font size on that at all?
Doug, can you, there we go. Thanks, Doug.
There we go.
Thanks, Doug.
So I'm going to deal with sort of some of the proposed changes that have gone on here. There were three basically, well, there were more, there were five elements to begin with to the original statement of the committee. We are suggesting leaving the first one, which is establishing intellectual property standards. You can read that one. We believe that's still a viable mission of this committee. And from time to time, we should revisit our intellectual property regulations to make sure that they're meshing with what we see happening in the landscape that we're involved with in today. The second one, I'm not exactly sure where it came from, considering the intellectual property implications of our collaborations with other countries, states, foundations, and other strategic partners, et cetera. That's something that we never have really been involved with. I don't even know that we have so much in the way of collaborations, except we have a semi-collaboration with the NIH regarding sickle cell disease. But otherwise, I don't know what was envisioned with respect to these collaborations, but to the best of my knowledge, nothing that approaches what's suggested here has come to exist. And so the first recommendation is to delete that one, since it doesn't seem to be apropos. The third one is, again, something that we just haven't really ever been involved with. We're talking about being involved with state and federal legislation or administrative or judicial actions that regard intellectual property matters. And that's not really a role that we've played to date. And it's not even clear to me what kind of a role we necessarily could play, except in particular cases where we might serve as on an amicus brief that is in support of a particular position, whether it's pro-patent, anti-patent, or some other intellectual property matter. But for the most part, we've not been engaged in this number 3, and I wouldn't make it a part of our mission statement. The fourth one, which is developing and refining policies to encourage industry involvement, is something that is being kept in the proposed new mission statement and expanded upon. And the last one, considering and refining our loan program, really ties into our regulatory framework. So we have basically, I think, refined our loan program and our other financing issues pretty much to where we wanted them to go. It could be that as we consider our intellectual property regulations down the road, we may want to amend those to do something different than what we're doing right now. But in essence, 5 is subsumed, if you will, in number 1, because that's the way that we deal with loans and financing issues, is through our regulatory framework. So now to go to the new mission statement. So skip this red line version. Is there a new version, Doug?
There is.
Yeah.
This is it.
Steve, can I just comment on one of the elements there?
Yes, sure.
So if you can go back, Doug, please. So number 2, this is sort of a holdover from when Bob was chair. And the general idea on that was to facilitate the collaboration of scientists from other countries with California PIs in connection with projects that CIRM would fund, whereby CIRM would fund the California PI, and whatever government it is, and through whatever means, would fund that the collaborating partner. And there were, in the early days, there were more than one project that resulted, not so much from this necessarily, but ended up with international collaborators. I think Katrina Jameson had one, and there may have been some others, but where they were, in that case, Canadian PIs who were co-PIs on the project, and CIRM funded Katrina and Canada funded whatever. And that was the idea. And I know we had, I believe we had an agreement. One of these agreements later on was with Israel and I think the I could be wrong in this, but I think the Brainstorm project in ALS, which was an Israeli-based company, which had a California collaborator, was somewhat further to that concept as articulated in these MOUs. So that's where that came from. Now, having said all that, we don't need an MOU to do that. We can just do it normally without having any MOUs in place, and it works exactly the same way. But I just wanted to give the subcommittee a sense of the derivation of that. Bob was quite big on that, and he and Alan entered into quite a few of those. We did a couple when I started, but that was it. But as I say, we don't need it. You can do the same thing, just given the system we have in place now. So thank you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to add some more color to that description. When I first came on board in 2009, we wanted to establish a collaborative effort with Germany, the Max Planck Center. But we could not because the German statutes still at that time had the anti-Nazi. It was a crime to do any kind of stem cell research in Germany. So I had my friends who were members of the German parliament change the law, and that resulted in a collaborative effort, which was going on between PIs in Germany, especially Leipzig, and PIs in California. Nothing really emerged from that, but it was a good agreement, and we laid the foundation for changing the law in Germany as it related to stem cell embryonic research. But I agree with Steve in that is you really don't need to have that anymore, and it just ought to be repealed in the next mission statement. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that, Art.
And just to make put a fine point on it, the actual language starts with considering the intellectual property implications. So whether we had these collaborations or not, I'm not sure that anybody really looked at intellectual property implications of those collaborations, which is really the focus of the language. So, but anyway, neither here nor there, we are recommending just removing that, and instead in dealing with a new number 2, which is a more real life, represented by a recent series or a chain of events with one of the academic institutions which we had an agreement. And what we found essentially is that we don't always see eye to eye with the people on the other side of the table, either with respect to how our regulations read or how they're applied. So we have both problems. The meaning of the regulations and then the application of the regulations in their particular setting. And so this was informative to me, and I think to JT and to Maria, because we were all very heavily involved with this, that this is probably not the only time that we're going to see differences of opinion on those two fronts, either regulatory language and its meaning or application of regulatory language to a particular situation. And so, and usually when that happens, as in the case that has just happened and been resolved, there are a significant amount of money that's involved. So it's not a minor dispute, but a more major dispute. And so at some levels, at the level of the board of the ICOC, we need somebody to kind of oversee those disputes and their handling and ultimate resolution as part of a board oversight responsibility. But in this case, it would happen through this committee. And so the language is really designed to capture that circumstance. So let me just stop there. Maria, well, I'll start with you, Kevin. I don't know how able we are to get into the specifics of this with the group. This is a public meeting.
Yeah, at this stage, Steve, we're still in the final process of finalizing that agreement. We do anticipate being able to report out on it on the board meeting on December 14th. But in the interest of not jinxing it and the fact that it's not finalized, I'd say we hold off until then.
No, I completely agree. So you'll have to sort of trust trust us on this one, that this is something that we believe ought to be inserted into the mission statement. This mission statement, by the way, is going to be presented to the ICOC at the December board meeting for either approval or amendment. So in the course of that, hopefully we'll be in a position to spell things out a little bit more clearly as to what led to this. As I indicated, it was a matter of fair importance, and this is an issue that we just needed to get our hands around, both this current issue, but what might happen in the longer run. So let me leave that unless there are other questions about that.
Steve, Barry has his hand raised.
Oh, hi, Barry.
Hey, Stephen. So let me ask you, in addition to advising the ICOC with respect to resolving these type of disputes, have we been able, as a consequence of what we've learned from this situation, to go back and tighten up the language or add additional language to the agreements to avoid these, let's say, misinterpretations or misunderstandings in the future?
So I would let Kevin answer that.
So Barry and other members, Ben's going to take us through a little bit of the current IP regulations as they stand at this point. This is perhaps the third iteration of the IP regulations, and I think there's been a learning process at every step of the way, going from the 2004 and working our way forward. So we still have some uncertainty. We still have grantees that are subject to these prior regulations. And we're developing a process by which we can seek some resolution, and whether that's through contractual amendments of their grant awards or through other agreements with them. But so we're trying to take those learnings, and those learnings were actually put into the revisions of the regulations as it went forward. But we still have we still have a tail on some of these grants that it's still relevant. So we're coming up with processes to work our way through. And one of the avenues to do that is, to your point, to go back and amend the grant awards and contracts to get agreement on how to handle the intellectual property implications.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
And so, Barry, let me add to that. So there are some, I think the language could be improved in certain aspects of the existing regulations. And I think we will take that opportunity once we get this current situation resolved to improve the language. And I think that will solve at least some of the issues.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So the last of the three, and this is the one that I spent a little more time focusing on personally. And can we get to the
yeah, Doug, can you just advance? Thank you. Advance to the next. Perfect.
And then, yeah, so in essence, when I joined CIRM many, many years ago, and became head of this committee, there was very little industry involvement with CIRM. There was I forget now the name of the company that was dealing with spinal cord injuries at the time. Somebody help me.
Geron,
right, exactly. But there was scant little industry interest in the regenerative medicine space, particularly in the stem cell area, et cetera. And so, that mostly CIRM dealt with the academic and research institutions along the way. And over time, momentum has been building for industry to become more and more involved in this area with their own programs. And we're beginning to see that in the applications that are coming in, all the way from translational applications, through clinical applications. And from my point of view, that's something I think we really need to embrace. We need to have industry become a strong partner with CIRM and be more heavily involved with CIRM, because ultimately, for almost any therapeutic that gets developed using CIRM funding, there's going to be an industry partner there at the end of the road, helping get that therapeutic approved at the level of the FDA and commercialized. because that's what industry is, that's where their capabilities lie, along with late stage development as well. So I think that there is going to need to be a good partnership between CIRM and industry. And I would like to see that more fleshed out as time goes on, with ideas that we might have that will bring industry more into the CIRM fold and be a willing partner for CIRM, and also for all of the academic and research institutions that we fund that need an outlet for their potential therapeutics once they've gotten them to the point where they're prepared to hand them off if that point comes. So, so this language was designed in essence to just broaden the idea of CIRM's relationship with the industry in a variety of matters. We're going to hear a little later on towards the end of this meeting from Shyam Patel, who's our business liaison person at CIRM, some of the things that he's been putting in place to ally with industry and encourage industry to be more involved with CIRM. So you'll see and hear about some of the things that are already in play. But I personally would like to see, as time goes on, we find more and other interactions with industry. So let me just stop there and see if anybody has any other reflections on that.
Steve, I just want to chime in on that because Shyam's already begun to work with our organization, Biocom California, and maybe you'll hear a little bit more about that. But you know, obviously everything you've said, I've seen in terms of the companies in our membership in California becoming more involved in acquiring and developing stem cell technologies. But what I felt a little bit uncomfortable about is the question in my mind is how much and to what should be that relationship between the companies in my organization and CIRM. So to see this endorsed by this committee and the work that Shyam's doing, I think is a great step forward.
Thanks, Joe. Dave, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I would just say I certainly agree with you, Steve, and also what Joe said, that it is important to foster this on both sides. Not only industry to be involved with CIRM, but as you know, investigators, grantees being involved with industry and facilitate it and encourage it. And I've got a couple of thoughts of that as we go forward. One other minor comment just on this document, and it is if you look at the 8th line down, the first word, assure, that's incorrect. It should be ENSURE there.
Well, Dave, we could have one of those debates about the use of the word assure or ensure.
I want to debate it.
But we won't have it on this meeting. So I'll defer to you and change it, although they are very close cousins. In fact, they might even be siblings.
So Stephen, since we're on the topic of correcting grammar, if you go 2 additional sentences down, I think there should probably be a TO after with respect to any potential disputes.
Yes, there's a word missing for sure, Barry. Good, some substantive comments. No, so let me just ask, I'm sort of here and I appreciate Joe and Dave's support. But are there, from the academic or research side, are there any reservations about wanting to be more heavily involved with industry? Sorry, Larry.
Yeah, it's not so much that I don't think a lot of industry involvement is great. In fact, I actively agree with Joe and the others, such as yourself, who've said how valuable industry involvement is in therapy development. I would just like us always to remember that not all medical therapies are developed via industry. If you go for a heart transplant or a kidney transplant, You don't go to Joe's kidney shop or Joe's heart shop. They're done in academic health centers. And the proper role of industry in those cases is they build a lot of the tools that are used in those procedures, but they weren't necessarily involved in the development of those procedures nor their delivery.
No, that's a fair point. And my focus was more on actual therapeutics, on the delivery of drugs for the most part, whether they be biologics or small molecules or whatever. So that's where that's the strength of industry is in that area.
Absolutely. Things that are perhaps mass produced, but as we see organoids being developed that might take over part of a function missing in a kidney, or I don't know. I'm not imaginative enough to think of everything that's going to happen, but I can just see that there are different paths, and we don't want to lose sight of that, because our IP regulations may well impact how those development paths go forward. So I don't want to lose sight of that as we move forward.
Sure. There are a couple of raised hands, but let me just interject. We actually have a live case going on right now to see how this rolls out with severe combined immunodeficiency and the treatment that's pioneered by Don Cohn at UCLA. All right. So how is that? And these are autologous treatments, right? They're not allogeneic. So it's a 1-by-1 kind of thing. And so what's the best way of rolling that out, that system that he has, if you will, for treating to more and more medical centers? I don't know that there's a good answer for that. We had a company that was going to be involved with that, and they backed out. They went away. And I can understand that because it's a bit of a complicated picture. So anyway, that's to me going to be an interesting one to resolve as time goes on. Right now, CERN continues to fund this kind of on a treatment basis. So Shlomo, you were third here. So let me start with JT and then Dave and then you.
So Steve, I just want to echo the value of point 3. I think this is consistent with the sort of ad hoc sporadic work that's been done over the years, looking to link industry with academia on our funded projects, going back right when I started, where we had like a VC fair where they'd come in and hear about all the projects going on, or the individual meetings we've had with C-suite members of big pharma in connection with certain projects or fields of projects. And so this is, I think, the advancing therapeutics largely by definition, when you get to the end of the road, it's so prohibitively expensive that you want to have industry partners. But more than that, CERN was set up to be the de-risking valley of death intermediary that gets you to industry and makes it so that it's attractive for them to come in and collaborate. And I think that a continued emphasis as the field marches inexorably along and things get further and further developed makes 100% sense. So I totally endorse that point.
Thank you. Dave?
Just a comment. I agree with Barry that there are many opportunities that CERN is supporting and funding that do not need to go through industry, but intellectual property is something that can be independent of industry. And I think that the state of California is interested in generating revenues from the investments that CERN makes, whether it be through industry or simply IP for a tool or technology. And so I think that part of it is to really encourage, and I think it takes an education of our grantees and academia. What is IP? How do you, when do you secure it, and how do you secure it, and where's the value? So it doesn't have to be restricted to industry, because I think we need to advise academics about intellectual property for what they're doing. And not all academic institutions are equal when it comes to their ability to guide that or to execute.
Well said. Shlomo?
Yeah, I too applaud the partnership and the synergy. I think it's very important for both sides. But you asked the question, how would academia feel about the language? And I would add a phrase perhaps somewhere in the paragraph, maybe before number 3, that's the respect for academic freedom. And while respecting academic freedom, CERN would develop and refine policies to encourage industry involvement, etc. But I think that academia will be very sensitive to the notion that CERN does maintain academic freedom, even though we do encourage these industrial partnerships.
I think that's a good suggestion, and I will ask Kevin to include that, the predicate language, while respecting academic freedom.
Thank you.
JT, you final hand.
Yeah, I just want to add one other thing is that the team has, as you know from talking to Sham and Maria Milan, has there are a number of venues where the melding of industry and PIs is sort of set up to happen, that we can perhaps piggyback more on than we have in the past, referring, for example, to the JP Morgan conference, which is a great one every January, or the meetings on the Mesa, or whatever it's now called, now that it's been moved to Carlsbad, down in Joe's neck of the woods, or the annual bio conference, which sort of moves around the country. These are all venues where industry and academics can be put together, and so I would suggest seeking out those sorts of things, perhaps even more vigorously. I know Sham and Maria and members of the team go to these and have every year have great meetings that facilitate exactly this. So we're teed up. I think we could just do for a bit more of it, and that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? What I would like to do is have this committee recommend to the board the adoption of this mission statement when it comes to it. So I'm going to ask for a motion to adopt or to recommend to the ICOC the new proposed IP industry subcommittee mission statement. Is there a motion to recommend this new statement to the board?
Yeah.
Anne Marie, so moved. Okay,
Seconded.
Well, second.
Okay, there was a number of seconds, so I'm too slow. So hopefully somebody caught who that was.
I think it was Michael. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Maria, do we really need a roll call vote for these things?
We do. Sorry.
I thought it was a subcommittee exception.
No, there isn't. I mean, I'd love to give you one, trust me, but I can't.
All right, then we'll do it the hard way.
Okay. Anne Marie Dulege,
Yes.
Larry Goldstein,
Yes.
Steve Julesgard,
Yes.
David Martin,
Yes.
Shlomo Ahmed, Joe
Yes.
Panetta,
Yes.
Barry Selleck,
Yes.
Michael Stamos,
Yes.
Jonathan Thomas,
Yes.
Art Torres.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. So the next item on the agenda is a discussion and update of IP regulations. Ben, are you the one that's going to speak to this?
Yes, I will just give a brief overview / update. So can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I would like to note that the current CERM IP regulations became official on September 4th of 2018, and with certain caveats applies to those awards with an award date on this date or after. This IP subcommittee approved a process to revise the regulations in January of 2017. And as noted earlier, approved the final draft in September of 2017. It was then sent to the state's Office of Administrative Law for approval, which took almost a year. At a very high level, the regulations, I'm just going to hit kind of the high spots of what the regulations cover. Basically, invention and licensing reporting requirements back to CIRM, publication requirements, reporting publications back to CIRM. They address patent ownership. I would note that CIRM does not take an ownership interest in any CIRM-funded inventions. They reside with the awardee. Also, licensing requirements for potential licenses. There's a section addressing access. There's also a section on revenue sharing and one on marching rights. As Steve noted, the most significant change in this 2018 version was changing the revenue sharing to incorporate nonprofit awardees into the pre-existing revenue sharing formula used for for-profit awardees. And so what happened there was the overall goal for the revenue sharing when we were preparing these regulations was to have consistency for all awardees, nonprofits and for-profits, and a clear revenue sharing formula premised upon success. Therefore, in prior iterations, CIRM would take a percentage of licensing revenue from nonprofit awardees. This current version is all royalty based and obtained from the eventual commercializing entity. So either if it's self-commercialized from a for-profit or a downstream licensee. The current formula for the royalty is 0.1% per $1 million of the CIRM award for the earlier of 10 years after date of first commercial sale, or 9x of the grant amount. So for example, a $10 million award would have a 1% royalty for 10 years or until $90 million is obtained by the state. As Kevin noted, there is a tail where a number of awards prior to September 4th, 2018 have existing license or equity agreements that would fall under the prior two versions of the CIRM IP regulations, those from 2009 and from 2014. But this exercise was undertaken in 2017 to simplify the revenue sharing aspects and also to attempt to address summative language that could be a matter of dispute between CIRM and an awardee. So we haven't had any payments made yet under this regulation. So no data yet on how effective it is. So that's kind of just a brief overview. And I can take any questions.
I don't see any questions, Ben. Again, and I think this just behooves us to do this periodically, is to review our regulations, particularly these, in light of the current state of affairs, and see if we think they continue to make sense to serve certainly the state's needs, CIRM's needs, but also the needs of the people that are the licensees of the intellectual property and are doing the work of developing products. There's not a value statement in that, just an observation. Sorry, yes.
Sorry, if I may ask a quick question.
Sure.
Ben, I'm just curious. On the one hand, I understand the beauty of basing any sort of payback to the state on success, on a royalty coming out of an eventual product. how do we deal with a case in which a company acquires a program, but instead of diligently prosecuting it to product and commercialization, their goal is simply to put it on a shelf for so-called strategic decay, while the institution that received the grant may get a large upfront payment for that. If the product is never actually developed, then CIRM and the state gets nothing in return. Do we have any sort of diligence provisions that are somehow baked into the type of situation where a company does acquire a project and chooses for strategic reasons not to prosecute it?
Yes, we do have diligence requirements, and it would be under our regulations it's a kind of a two-part step. The first is under our licensing requirements, the awardee has a number of obligations, but the first is to ensure that there's a contractual obligation for the licensing entity to accept the CIRM regulation. So they're also bound by the regulations. And then the next step after that would be to look in at our margin rights. And, historically, at the NIH level, attempts to use margin rights have not been successful. We haven't encountered that situation here, but I imagine if there are projects where we have put in a bit of time and money, and it is being designated to be shelved, we would have an interest to getting that out to the patients. So it wouldn't be the easiest process, but there is language in the regs for us to follow it in an attempt to get it back.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that come out of this, and it's identified on pages 9 and 10 under Roman 6, licensing and assignment of CIRM-funded inventions and technology. We have never asked to see a license agreement from one of our grantees licensing their technology out to some other party to make sure that license agreement incorporates some of the requirements that we have in this particular provision that need to be in that license agreement. And that's something I think that we should discuss, is whether or not we should demand to see a license agreement before it gets signed up, to assure ourselves that what we want is actually covered or not. It's not without debate, and it's not without likely some resistance, but it's something certainly to think about.
I would clarify that statement just a little bit. We do get the license agreements post-signing. There is an annual utilization report update where they do actually download those license agreements. But we don't get, they don't reach out to us during the, pre-signing phase, the negotiation phase. So I just would like to note that.
No, I understand. So we kind of take what they leave us at the end of the day. And I'm not sure what we would do if they didn't follow through on the commitments that are required in these regulations. So assume that they didn't do something they were supposed to do. What do we do about it? It's a little late to be having to look at it after the fact. So anyway, we can take this up later, but I just make that point that as we mature here in the development of our regulations and their application, as we get closer and closer to real life, actual products coming out of this that are going to be meaningful, let's make sure we have the tools that we need to get for the state its due deserts for having forwarded or fronted taxpayer money for this work to go on. Anything else about the IP regulations before we move to some of the industry partnerships and alliances that we have? All right, if none, then Sean, you're on the floor.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm not going to take up too much time. I'm just going to briefly walk through what we're doing with the Industry Alliance Program. and I can touch a little bit on some of the topics you've raised to date, as well as some questions. First of all, on the IP side, I just want to note that as we're building up relationships with the academic licensing offices in the state, we are actually getting some interaction. It's not always consistent, where they're reaching out to us prior to establishing those licensing agreements about CERM requirements. And we are able to advise them on how to incorporate those, but it's not consistent, as you mentioned. So with respect to the Industry Alliance Program, just a quick slide I'm going to put up, and I'm going to walk through some of the things we're planning to do going forward as part of the new strategic plan if the board approves it in December. But I have one slide that kind of lays out who the actual partners are to date and what the Industry Alliance Program even is. So that's going to be helpful. So hopefully people can see the slide that I have up right now. I'll move to the one slide that I want to display. It's this one. So the Industry Alliance Program was launched a few years ago, and initially with a few launch partners, the ones at the top there, Vivo Capital, Panacea, and Blue Rock. And the intent was to work collaboratively with these industry partners, whether they be venture capital firms, big pharma, or small biotechs who are well-funded and are looking to expand their pipeline. And the intent was to help them get a look into CERM's portfolio of funded therapies. A lot of those are academic projects at the early stages, identify ones that they may be interested in having a discussion regarding partnership opportunities, and then facilitating that interaction between the industry partner and CERM's portfolio. Part of that is us doing a lot of outreach broadly to the industry. We are constantly speaking to big pharma companies, venture capital, and as Steve and others have mentioned, we go to a lot of these meetings and conferences where we're also giving broad exposure to what CERM is doing and what our portfolio is shaping up to look like. And so initially it was that one-on-one interactions. We facilitated plenty of one-on-one meetings between our grantees and industry partners. Some of those got to be term sheets, and I think some have been established as agreements. And part of the next step is going to be to expand on this relationship and not just be one-on-one interactions with partnering, but find ways for the industry partners to provide their resources to our grantees. Those could be technology, there could be starting materials for therapeutic development, it could be expertise, manufacturing services, and so on. And so with that in mind, we spent the last couple of years expanding the Industry Alliance Program membership. And going forward, we plan to do that consistently more over the next couple of years. And so we look at it as a number of different types of partners that we bring in. There's going to be the ones who are interested in partnering for licensing and acquiring technologies that are CERM funded. There can be the ones who are providing resources, and then the ones who are providing services. And so with that in mind, we have these 11 partners currently, and we're expanding on that going forward. Of these 11 partners, we're in discussion with about half of them at the moment on providing some of their unique capabilities to our grantees. And I'll walk through what that looks like in the next slide. Some of the newer ones, all the ones at the bottom, they all have black and white logos. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean, but I guess we could change our logo to be the same. But as you can see, the newer ones are venture capital firms that have a really established presence in cell and gene therapies, as well as more manufacturing-oriented partners. And that's part of the push toward what's in our new strat plan with regard to building out a manufacturing network. So with that in mind, going beyond that one-on-one interaction, we believe there are a few ways that we want to incorporate these partners into the fold of CERM's funding programs. So first and foremost, I'm borrowing Maria's term here, we want to build a knowledge network between the IIP partners and the CERM grantees. This is a lot of what you guys were talking about before, which is being able to have interaction between our academic grantees and our small companies and the industry partners. Is not just transactional, it's more of a flow of information. So there's scientific information flowing back and forth, there's expertise around commercialization, market research, IP provisions, and so on. That could be exchanged, and having that information flow happening within the confines of a CERM type of event. So what we plan to do with that is have quarterly meetings of our industry partners where we'll have our both Industry Alliance Program partners plus our own grantees around certain themes to promote and facilitate this information exchange. And to JT's point, Steve's point, and Joe's point, we want to also capitalize on the events happening in California. So there are, as Joe would like to note, he's got a Biocom conference he has every year as a partnering conference, there's a meeting on the Mesa and other events. And in fact, a lot of the UCs also have their own events. UCLA in particular, is a big event every year. And so those could all be opportunities where our grantees can get interaction with industry partners, and we can facilitate that using our own leverage there. The second point is the one that we're most focused on right now, which is around having our industry partners provide unique resources and technologies and make those available to our grantees at an earlier stage, the discovery stage, the translational stage, and so on. And so there, what we're doing is we're working with them to create master agreements or unified agreements that our grantees can take advantage of. And when we do that, our role in this is to make sure that the industry partner knows how our funding mechanisms work, how our regulations work, and then making sure that whatever agreement they're drafting meets both the needs of our academic grantees as well as our for-profit grantees. And that is around making sure that it's cost effective, it is not putting an undue burden on early stage research, and also if there's going to be a need for downstream licenses, particularly on commercial licensing, that those are all transparently laid out at that early stage. So our grantees know what they're getting into, even if they're using that material for research stage. And so those are some of the things that we're working on with our current partners, making those resources available. And we're getting a lot of traction from the industry side and wanting to work with CERM and wanting to work with our grantees on that. And they're willing to provide really high quality resources to our grantees in this type of a framework. And then lastly is that as we, assuming that the board approves the strategic plan that's going to be going forward, I guess in a couple of weeks, if that is approved, then part of that is building out a California manufacturing network, which is going to bring in both CERM-funded academic facilities as well as industry partners. And our intent would be to use the IAP as a mechanism to bring in some of those industry partners to provide manufacturing resources, services, expertise, and so on to both our grantees as well as the academic manufacturing facility network. So those are some of the ways that we see the future of this program being built up over the next few years. And we're always very much excited and happy to get any sort of feedback that you have on ways that we could do more or more effectively. So I'll stop there and take any questions you might have.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Art. I wanted to know, when you get to these meetings with the industry representatives, what's the pushback not moving to the next level?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, Art.
I said, so you're in these meetings, and what are the issues that come up that they say, well, no, I don't think we're interested after all?
Right, yeah. So, the interest level can be from both sides. So, for example, many academic PIs know that they can use CERM funding to take their projects much deeper into clinical development. And that actually increases the value and de-risks it further using CERM funding. And so they may not be interested at the early stage, but they still want to have that conversation and interaction going so they can have partnering opportunities at the later stage. From the industry side, a lot of it is focused around market size, IP position, and so on. So those, the standard things you would expect as to why somebody might not want to move forward.
Could you repeat that, Art? We didn't understand that.
I said, so it varies from case to case.
That is correct, yeah.
And Art's JT, I would also add to that a number of pharma, for example, haven't made the decision to actually get into regenerative medicine. So they're really a select few that have decided that the field is ripe enough to get involved, and those are the ones you want to focus on. A lot of them still haven't. They're waiting for further proof of concept as the field matures.
So just two quick comments. The first is Shama actually pointed out, I think, some of the more important ones. So while CERM and our funding, we focus on scientific merit largely, that's only one of the variables that industry considers. So they do consider things like intellectual property position, market size, path to commercialization, a number of things that come into play before they invest money. So they have a much broader way of looking at things, understandably so. The second is I just want to commend Sham for all the work that he's been doing. So we've had somebody involved sort of in the business area, since I can remember, but nobody who's been as active and as I think as hardworking as Sham, who's really beginning to develop this area. So I just want to note my appreciation for all the hard work you do, Sham. Thank you for that.
Thank you for your kind words, Steve.
I'd like to add to that, Steve, because as you know, we're one of the few longest standing members, and we've never had this kind of action. We've never had this kind of input. So, Sham, thank you again, because I know how hard you've been working on this.
Thanks, Art. Yes. So any questions for Sham before we wrap up here? It's 4:00. JP and then Dave.
So quick, Sham, this is a tangential question for you and Maria both. What on Blue Rock, what's the status of their development on the Parkinson side? And do we have any progress on trying to lure them into California to do any of their clinical trial work here?
So we've been engaging to Blue Rock and now their parent company, Bayer, as well. So Blue Rock is interested in finding opportunities to work with some grantees. With respect to their trial, I think is when it goes to, this is purely from my opinion perspective, is when it goes to the next stage and they're looking to do multi-site trials, California is obviously going to be a player there. And knowing that Bayer has a Berkeley facility that is expanding, I think you can expect that there's going to be a bigger Blue Rock presence in California going forward. Hopefully, one would hope.
Thank you.
They do have intent to have a trial site in California.
Thank you.
Dave?
I mentioned before my concern that, excuse me, that in academia, I guess I have to say it's based on my experience in biotech, small biotech companies, that the understanding of what's patentable and how one goes about it is really limited, even within a biotech company. And that has to be true within academia, although it's less of a problem now than it was 40 years ago when I was immersed in it. And so I really wonder whether we need, I don't know, maybe a boot camp or something for our grantees about, what is the value of IP? How do you go about it? What's a provisional? What's a filing, et cetera? Just to educate them so that we're not missing opportunities, whether they be technology that's going to turn into a therapeutic and requires industry to commercialize it, or it's just going to be licensing a tool or a technology. Because I think it's a two-way. It has to go both ways. We have to have industry willing and able and pursuing, but we also have to provide IP in order to get returns.
No, I agree with that. And I think there's a lot of variability amongst the academic institutions. Some are very well advanced on this front and some aren't. I'm actually an advisor to a research institution in California that has a product that they're asking about whether or not it's worth developing. The patent was filed on the compound involved in 2013, and nothing was done in terms of development until 2020. That doesn't happen in industry. You've got 20 years from 2013 of exclusivity, and then it's all done. So very well as I do, if you've got something that you think is, has use, jump on it and figure out whether you're going to follow it or not. What didn't happen in this case. And now I think they're going to have a problem with trying to develop the product further because they're going to run into generic competition if this product ever gets launched within probably 3 years after it is launched. Barry and then Shlomo.
Thanks, Stephen. I would add on to what David said. I mean, not only do the grantees need to understand what is patentable and how to go about creating intellectual property, but, and this is really for Sham, our experience is that a lot of academic inventors really are more interested, or they're focused more on the basic science aspect of their projects. They're very highly motivated to get a great publication out, and they frequently pay less attention to what would actually comprise an attractive product from a commercialization perspective. So from the perspective of getting pharma companies involved earlier with the grantees to help guide them with respect to how best to focus and develop their technology into something that would be commercially attractive to ultimately commercialize, I think that would be real value add. And that, Sham, might be a way of getting pharma companies involved earlier with our grantees without really asking them for much of anything other than just kind of advice and guidance.
Shlomo? I think you're on mute.
Dave raises a very important point about education. I think that the lack of clarity is the fact that the grantees don't own the IP. The IP is owned by the institute. The non-profit institution owns the IP. And so it's the non-profit institution that, in your case, is at fault, not the grantee. The grantee has some relationship and some arrangement with their home institution for sharing of royalties and sharing of IP, but the ultimate ownership is the institution. So if we're going to do any education and any application of our principles for our grants, we should be engaging with the respective tech transfer officers in our grantee institutions, because they're the ones who call the shots, not the grantee. I agree with Barry. The grantee really, they're interested in their next paper. It's the institution who has the valuable property.
Unless you're Irv Weissman.
Really takes the grantee to identify and go see the development office.
Sorry, David, could you repeat that? I stepped on your tread of thought.
No, I just say, yeah, I agree. It's the institution, but the ideas and the introduction of what they have that might be patentable comes from the grantee and the PI's lab. But they have to know, gee, maybe I should go talk to our development or intellectual property office. They're not out scouting that I know of in most institutions.
Could be.
Yeah, I think it's something that warrants some investigation and some about what really goes on. I do think it varies a lot amongst institutions, and it would be behoove us to both educate the grantees, the PIs, as well as the Office of Technology Transfer departments in institutions. You're right, Shlomo. Both that's the gatekeeper.
Could I ask Maria a question? Don't the institutions sign? Don't they sign that they agree when they accept the grant? When they submit the grant, they sign that they agree to our IP policy.
Yes. Yep. I wanted to say, Shlomo, another thing on that matter, and I know Sham has his hand raised because when we were going through various parts of this, developing the IAP, one of the things we did was we took a tour of all the most of the OTLs. And so Sham can speak to that because we were trying to understand the motivations, the lack of alignment. Part of it was informing them of our IP regs. Some of them didn't even realize some of the revisions to the IP regs. But just one of the concepts is, can we partner with you so you can motivate your PIs to just be more opportunistic with in this arena? And the other part of it was, we even said, what would it take for you to spend more time bringing visibility to our programs, right? So part of it was it was so unfamiliar, it's easier for them to deal with the traditional small molecules and other types of technology platforms than some of the really complex things that our programs present. So Sham, I know that you wanted to speak to this, but I wanted to point that out.
Yeah, so a couple of points on that. With respect to the education of the PIs and institutions, so I think you raised a lot of good points. Is two things there. One is that it's not only knowing when to file the patent disclosure with the tech licensing office, but how to convey the value of that IP. Because as Shlomo mentioned, not all IP is going to be prosecuted by the institution. So the filing fees and all that, because of that, the costs associated with that, they're not going to file everything unless there is interest from industry. So we definitely appreciate the comments you raised about bringing in the pharma partners earlier on to highlight the value of the IP and the education components with respect to both when to file and how to convey the value of the IP to the tech licensing offices. As Maria noted, when we were speaking to different tech licensing offices, there were a number of things that were brought up that we believe we can work more closely with the tech licensing offices going forward. And one of those was on when is CERM funding flowing into these labs? And if there is on our side, if our science officers have flagged some unique technology that's being developed, is working with the PIs to file the disclosures, and they actually do that. And then we can follow up with the tech licensing offices to convey the value of those disclosures as well. So we're working through that. We had some discussions early on about how to develop training and education materials that we can coordinate with the tech licensing offices on for the PIs and incorporating that into the funding mechanism as part of the award mechanism. And so those are things that we want to continue working on going forward as well. And if you have any thoughts on that, we'd love to hear those either here or offline.
I want to also add, Sham, one of the things we asked them is, we have a patent assistance fund. We actually have funding to help them file. Why isn't anybody using it? We actually have had this in existence. I don't know. Ben probably knows the amount of that's been expended, but it is amazing. So we still do need to figure out what the incentive strategy would be in terms of aligning these interests.
Yeah, we had a patent assistance fund that has now expired, but there were probably the max award was 350,000, and it did require a 50-50, I believe, split in fees. 50% of your dollars, and we would match 50%. What we found was many of the major academic institutions did not use the $350,000 they got, while a number of the smaller institutions did use the funding. So we sent out reminders about due dates, saying the grant was about a year away from expiring. Do you want to use the funds? And the response rate, everyone was still interested in retaining the funding, but there was just not that much usage for the largest grant holders. So.
All right, well, we've run past now. I think we were scheduled to go to 4, or was it longer? I don't remember.
4:30.
4:30, okay, so we have a little bit of time. Maria, just one quick thought on this subject. Instead of having a patent assistance grant, and this may seem a bit off the wall, but I'll pose it nonetheless, in any particular grant, of allocating a certain percentage of that grant to be used for intellectual property pursuit of whatever the work that's being done. And so it's just earmarked, it's set aside there. And if it isn't getting used, well, then somebody needs to get on the phone and understand why they're not using it, because I do take it, we track, I don't know if it's quarterly or every half year or whatever usage of the money that we're providing them. So we would know if they were using it, and it might encourage them to be a little more diligent in that regard. Just a thought. I'm sure
it was we actually brought that up with some of the institutions. There was interest in terms of aligning interests. Who we really need to fund is somebody in the tech transfer office, like a project manager at the tech transfer office who will basically do that work for us. And so we actually, that was an idea we had. And if there is interest in it by this subcommittee, we'd like to pursue it, because I think it actually is something that could work. The PIs themselves, just regardless of, what that is, that's probably to them, just, they don't even know how to use that. And so it would be, incentivizing their tech transfer office to work on our behalf, essentially, to optimize that.
Yeah, I mean, this just supports what Shlomo said, right? Our agreements are with the institution. They're not with the grantee. So let's get the institution involved. The institution is not just the grantee. They have other capabilities as well that ought to be put to work.
And if we were to do that, one of the ideas, because we went pretty far into these conversations. So for the UCs, for instance, it may be at the level of UCOP that often gets more traction than doing UC per UC type conversation. So just putting it out there.
Okay. Anything else that any of the committee members would like to address? If not, I'm going to open it up for any public comment. All right, if there's nothing from committee members, is there any public comment? Maria?
No public comment.
Well, seeing none, a comment from either attendees or the public. Adieu. I call the meeting adjourned. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks,
Au revoir.
Steve.
Ciao.
Yes, ciao, Art.
Good
Thank you,
meeting.
Mr.
Good
Chairman.
meeting. Thank you. Good meeting.
Peter saying.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.